Protestors from the township of Oro-Medonte packed Barrie City Hall during last week's City Council meeting to voice their opposition to the proposed annexation of Oro-Medonte land by the city of Barrie.
They proposed that they wanted to annex over 2,200 acres of our farmland, our environmentally sensitive land. The group, we're going to continue our fight to stop annexation of Oro-Medonte land for Barrie to take over. We're going to work with our council, who is very transparent and listens to us. We also are asking that the city of Barrie or Mayor Nuttall apologize and show some accountability, because they started this proposed annexation for industrial land, and it has cost our taxpayers over $20,000.
The meeting began with a presentation from Hemson Consulting Group, which detailed the findings of their land needs assessment report.
Yeah, so I did want to just emphasize the important role that the city plays in the study area and in the broader region because of its size, its centrality, and the scale of growth that is taking place in Barrie. But also that Barrie plays a sort of a regional service center role and is also the prime mover in this municipal process. I don't, having said all that, want to marginalize the fact that the townships of Springwater and Oro-Medonte and the county also have their own land needs, and we have looked at those and will report on them.
The report explored Barrie's long-term growth requirements, focusing on employment lands, housing needs, and population projections through 2051. Hemson highlighted that while Barrie is making strides towards compact development and intensification, challenges persist in achieving targets for both residential and employment land development. The presentation revealed that Barrie currently has sufficient employment land in theory, but it struggles with a shortage of market-ready, shovel-ready sites to attract businesses. Hemson emphasized that while annexing land might address long-term requirements, it would not solve immediate concerns relating to infrastructure and land preparation. The discussion also dwelled into Barrie's ambitious housing intensification strategy. Hemson noted that the city needs to build at unprecedented densities to meet its official plan's population targets. However, current development patterns and the intensification rate fall short of the necessary trajectory. During the meeting, councillors raised critical questions about the report's conclusion.
Slide 26, the title kind of caught me as it said, two broad options for addressing land needs. And that made me think of the last two words, and Barrie needs land. Is that fair as a summary, that in all of what we see here today, that Barrie needs land?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that if Barrie is to achieve the population target in its official plan, it needs more land.
The Oro-Medonte protesters expressed strong objections, citing concerns about the loss of agricultural land, environmental impacts, and the erosion of their township's identity. They called on the council to explore alternative solutions to Barrie's growth challenges without encroaching on neighboring municipalities. They also called on Barrie Mayor Alex Nuttall and the city of Barrie to apologize for annexation attempts. The meeting underscored the broader regional tension between growth and preservation.
I think you really only have to go to slide 25 where it tells everything. And here is a outside Toronto-based company that, I'll be quite honest with you, my 6 years on council, I've never even heard of. So it's very evident they have no skin in the game here with the city of Barrie.
With council committed to continuing discussions on how to address Barrie's pressing development needs.
It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. So the actual facilitation itself is only related to Barrie, Springwater, and Oro-Medonte. And by verdict of Springwater and Oro-Medonte being inside of the county of Simcoe, the county of Simcoe is at the table as well.
At the end, the council passed Deputy Mayor Robert Thompson's amendment, which increased Barrie's land request to 4,000 acres to address growth needs, included Little Lake protection, and directed expedited negotiations with neighboring municipalities and the province. The city staff will report back on Stage 3 plans by January 8, 2025. The following is our interview with a representative from an Oro-Medonte advocacy group and the coverage of council deliberations.
I represent a group called Friends of the Future. This group was formed last January in response to Mayor Nuttall's proposal of annexing our land in Oro-Medonte for industrial development. They proposed that they wanted to annex over 2,200 acres of our farmland, our environmentally sensitive land, to develop industry. So we were like, this is not appropriate to put big industry across from Barrie Ward 1, which is a residential area. It's not appropriate right near a college or a hospital. Plus, the road is a tiny country road. They would have to cross up past and redo the whole intersection at Highway 11, and that would be extremely costly. There's a church there, there's a cemetery there. This is totally unrealistic, especially when Barrie has significant industrial land in the south that they have not, in the last 14 years since annexing it from Innisfil, to put services in to make room for industry. Well, first of all, I'll address the report that we were here at the council called the Hemson report. We are delighted and we are excited because we feel we have triumphed. And the reason is because this process started by the city of Barrie taking a pencil and drawing a map all around the north end, Oro-Medonte and Springwater, stating that they needed land for industrial development. They drew a picture of over 5,000 acres. Now the Hemson report has come out saying Barrie has enough industrial land for development. We won. We are happy. However, that Hemson report now is talking about housing needs. And we feel that the numbers that are reported in that Hemson report are not accurate. One of the things is that Barrie has only been able to, for the last 15 years, do 600 units of housing per year. Now, starting this year, and for the next 30, they have to do 2,100 units per year to make their growth target. To me, that's unrealistic. Barrie needs to work within their own boundaries. They need to intensify their housing. They need to develop their South End lands that they have a huge amount of South End lands that they refuse or they don't seem to be planning to put infrastructure in. They annexed that land from Innisfil over 14 years ago and they still haven't serviced that land. So, why annex us? They did a poor job down in Innisfil. We want to protect our borders. We are farmland, we're environmentally sensitive land. We love our community. We want to keep our border. The group, we're going to continue our fight to stop annexation of Oro-Medonte land for Barrie to take over. We're going to work with our council, who is very transparent and listens to us. We also are asking that the city of Barrie or Mayor Nuttall apologize and show some accountability because they started this proposed annexation for industrial land, and it has cost our taxpayers over $20,000. Well, we're going to, the Oro-Medonte Council, as well as our community, are going to study this Hemson report. We're going to ask for a readjustment of the population numbers, and we'll see whether we as a community want to move on to stage 3.
I would like to bring forth the presentation from Hemson Consulting Joint Land Analysis Stage 2 and call upon Stefan. I'm just going to say your first name because I don't think I'm going to do your last name any justice. I apologize profusely. And Michael Skelly of Hemson Consulting, who are joining virtually to provide the presentation. Welcome to Barrie City Council this evening.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, members of council. It's the mayor mentioned, I work at Hemson Consulting, and we've been retained to look at the long-term land requirements for the city, as well as the neighboring townships of Oro-Medonte and Springwater. As part of a process involving 4 municipalities, the city, the townships, and the county of Simcoe, and a process that's also being supported by the Office of the Provincial Land and Development Facilitator. The work really at this stage, and this will be the purpose of today's presentation, is to summarize the findings of the answers to 2 key questions that we were asked to look at. First was whether Barrie, Oro-Medonte, and Springwater have enough land to accommodate their projected population and employment growth 2051. And if they do, then really, we can end the process there and pick it up again in 10 years or whenever the city and the county next do their official plan updates. But if the municipalities don't have enough land for their long-term needs, then what options are available within a defined study area to accommodate this growth? The study area is shown on the map there on the screen. Covers the boundary between the city and the 2 townships. I did just want to begin by sort of acknowledging the somewhat unique role that the city of Barrie plays in this study area and indeed in the broader region. Yeah, so I did want to just emphasize the important role that the city plays in the study area and in the broader region because of its size, its centrality, and the scale of growth that is taking place in Barrie. But also that Barrie plays a sort of a regional service center role and is also the prime mover in this municipal process. In other words, the process is very much responding to claims and proposals by the city. So much of what you'll see in this presentation is a response to these proposals. I don't, having said all that, want to marginalize the fact that the townships of Springwater and Oro-Medonte and the county also have their own land needs, and we have looked at those and will report on them to you this evening. But I want to start with the analysis of employment areas, because it's really the city's claims about a lack of employment lands that initiated this process. And I do first also want to acknowledge city staff's concerns expressed earlier today that we at Hemson may have included natural heritage areas or NHS areas in our assessment of the city's employment land supply. And so I just wanted to be clear that we specifically excluded designated NHS areas from our analysis. And we also excluded additional environmental constraints that we saw when we visited these sites from our estimate of the vacant land. But we'd of course be happy to review these assumptions with staff. We want to make sure that we've properly reflected what's on the ground, and we're happy to do that in the coming weeks. But with that caveat, our assessment is that the city's long-term employment area supply appears to be sufficient to meet the forecasted growth to 2051. We looked at the assumptions and the calculations done through the city's municipal comprehensive review between 2019 and 2022. There were some fairly ambitious assumptions about the density of employment on the vacant lands. And we also noted that the city is planning to build out every scrap of employment area over the life of its official plan to 2051, which isn't great, because you always want some kind of vacancy available to allow people who want to come in and locate here to have the kind of choice that they need to make those decisions. But taken together, the city, in theory, has enough long-term land supply over the long term, would probably need some more ahead of 2051, sometime in the 2040s. But that can be reviewed and updated as part of its next official plan update. That doesn't necessarily need to be dealt with now. However, There is certainly a shortage of market-ready, shovel-ready lands. Part of the shortage arises from the city's need to expedite the delivery of water and wastewater servicing to its lands. Some of it's tied to provincial investments that are required to build interchanges on Highway 400 to unlock some of the lands in the southern part of the city. And some of it is tied to the fact that some of the configurations of the existing lands are unsuited to allowing people to, amalgamate large parcels of land and build those sort of employment clusters that are extremely important. So I certainly don't want to underestimate the importance of shovel-ready lands, and they, of course, are a concern. But shovel readiness, in our view, can't really be solved by the proposal to annex land to the city. And you can see on the map here in the orange areas there, these are the proposed boundary expansion areas. The rectangular area in sort of the northeast part of the city in Oro-Medonte, and then these areas to the north and to the west of the city in the township of Springwater. I just also want to make clear that there's been various iterations of this map. The one that is being shown here is the one that was proposed to Springwater Council in November 2023. So we're certainly aware that there are various iterations. Moving into Oro-Medonte, this township is blessed with a lot of employment lands very well located along Highway 11, including a very strategically located group of land parcels around the Lake Simcoe Regional Airport. The county official plan is premised on all of these lands being built out to 2051 at rural employment densities. So on the assumption that servicing is not provided to these lands. Certainly if servicing was provided, then the employment growth potential of the township would be greater than what's set out in the county official plan. But that growth forecast is in line with what the township is already planning for through its employment land strategy. It does not need any additional, in our view. When we look at the lands in Oro-Medonte that have been proposed for expansion by the city, our view is that these lands are not particularly well suited for employment areas for a few reasons. But perhaps more importantly is that they don't directly address, as I mentioned before, Barrie's lack of shovel-ready employment area. So just very briefly, you can see the lands here. What's in green is about 40% of the land base. That's undevelopable land. And in the yellow and the orange, these are agricultural and rural lands. Some of them are actually in agricultural use. So, our sense is that notwithstanding that there is water and wastewater servicing available along the western edge, along Penetanggal Road here, these lands would take some time to develop. They would need to be subdivided. There are existing uses. There's a rural road network here that would need to be upgraded, and would probably need to be intersection upgrades to allow, the volume of truck traffic that we might expect to get in and off this highway exit. So it does present challenges, we think, and doesn't really meet the city's needs for the shovel readiness issue. Unlike Oro-Medonte, Springwater has relatively few employment areas, and none are adjacent to the Highway 400 corridor, or indeed this important Highway 26 corridor leading from Barrie to Wasaga Beach and Collingwood. Springwater's employment areas really serve local rather than regional needs. What warrants special attention really is whether the township has enough land to provide the range of employment opportunities it needs given the amount of population and housing it is planning. So that, especially in the Midhurst secondary plan, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. These are the lands that Barrie has proposed for boundary adjustments for review to Springwater. And just very quickly, these are also problematic, we think, for certainly addressing Barrie's short-term supply needs. These areas here to the east very well located from a highway access perspective, certainly. But some topographical constraints. I mean, they're not particularly flat terrain for a lot of large users. Bringing services across the highway corridor to this parcel up in the brown area here, potentially problematic. People have mentioned Little Lake already this evening, and certainly goes without saying that there's a lot of environmentally protected, environmentally sensitive lands around here that are probably not suited for industrial or business park uses. This portion here to the north of the city, very good land topographically, but once Midhurst is built out, these lands will be squashed between a large residential area to the north and a large residential area to the south without great access to the highway. So there are compatibility issues for sure with these lands. And the lands to the west, more possibilities. They are very close to employment areas in the city, better access to Highway 400, but you can see that there are some environmental constraints here as well. And so the total land area available, perhaps not hugely, not a huge game changer, shall we say. So just to summarize on the employment area land needs assessment, want to emphasize strongly that the Highway 400 corridor, both south and north of Barrie, is an extremely important economic corridor. Linking the north and south of Ontario and Barrie is a very important stop along the way. And the demand for this land for a range of employment uses spans both local and regional needs, but also national and international needs as well. And local municipalities and the county are planning for these lands to be developed, putting infrastructure in place to support that demand. You can see down in Bradford, West Gwillimbury, where services are now available, construction is occurring at pace. In Innisfil, servicing, imminent but not available, construction occurring a little bit slower. No reason, in our view, why Barrie's employment areas in the south, once serviced, wouldn't be similarly attractive. And in fact, there are some advantages that Barrie has over many of these other areas. Very close to a large labor supply, good rail and transit links that the other areas perhaps don't have. So, in summary, Barrie's employment area supply, we think, is sufficient, at least in theory, to meet long-term demand. Do not want to ignore the short-term supply issues. But the case for annexation for land in Oro-Medonte and Springwater to solve those short-term issues, we think, is relatively weak. Now I want to just move to community areas and just stress that community areas are centered around the needs for housing and the supporting infrastructure and services and local retail and institutions like schools that are needed to sustain residential communities. So it's a broad range of sort of community and neighborhood uses. And I want to just spend a minute or two describing the housing market dynamics that we need to understand when we talk about the city's needs. Because, each municipality here is not sort of a little universe unto itself when it comes to the housing market. There's very much a regional housing market, and there is an interplay between the supply and demand of land in each of these communities that I think we need to understand. So what this chart does is it shows you the annual population growth in the Simcoe Census Division, which captures the whole county and the cities of Barrie and Orillia. And so the Barrie's population growth is shown in green, Orillia's in gold, and then the rest of the county in red. And you can see here at the beginning of the century that, Barrie accommodated most growth in the census division before 2006. It was one of the fastest growing urban places in Canada at the time. And then around 2006, 2007, it ran out of greenfield land. And growth slowed considerably. The 2008, 2009 recession didn't help at all, and that hit growth across the whole of Ontario. But you can see coming out of the recession that Barrie's greenfield supply remained constrained and growth remained low, whereas regional housing demand was met by growth in the county. and that's in the red here, and growth really accelerated quite rapidly, peaked in 2017. And then as Barrie's supply came back into play, we can see the shift of the demand being met in the city as Barrie's supply returns. The point about this is that the demand for housing is a regional demand. It's relatively finite. Barrie has certain advantages that make it very attractive to key segments of the housing market, especially the apartment market. People like retirees want to be near the hospital. People like students want to be near the Georgian College. Want to recognize that dynamic. The other thing I just want to point out very quickly is that the form of housing in the city has changed quite significantly. So, in Barrie's wave of development and growth in the late 90s and early 2000s, most of the housing that was built was single detached units, and that's shown in the green portion of the bars here. But now, in this sort of later wave of growth that we're seeing recently, to a much more diverse housing mix being constructed. The red is apartment forms, and the gold is row housing. And this current slowdown, by the way, in 2023, 2024, has nothing to do with supply and everything to do with the high price of home, relative high price of homes. It's an affordability issue. The other thing I want to point out too is that although Barrie's growth has picked up, it is still not as fast as it needs to be in order to meet its 2051 official plan population target. The current growth trajectory is shown in the white line here. And the dotted green line is the growth trajectory that the city needs to achieve in order to hit its 2031 housing pledge. And the gold trajectory, what for long-term land needs is the more important one. That's the trajectory that it needs to be on in order to achieve the 2021 population forecast. And I'll come back to that at this point about the rate of growth at the end as well. But want to first just test, the official plan and its goals for achieving the 2051 population target. So what the official plan does is it commits 50% of all new homes to be built within the existing built-up area of the city to 2051. And then the remaining 50% of the homes to be built in the greenfield areas of the city. And just a few numbers for you, because I think we need to understand and make sense of the land needs numbers later on. The municipal comprehensive review that the city undertook as part of the official plan process, was planning for 56,000 units between 2021 and 2051. Growth up to 2021 was less than what was anticipated. So actually, in order to get to 2051, the city now needs to build 62,000 units. Half of those, as I said, will be in the built-up area, 31,000, 1,000 units a year. And half of those will need to be in the greenfield area, again, about 1,000 units a year. So if we look at the built-up area, these are the units that will be built as intensification. These will mostly be apartments. When we look at the performance, the intensification performance of the city since 2019, we see that, the city has been building about 35% of all homes, mostly as apartments, as intensification. So it's very different kind of range and mix of housing from the past, but it's still not 50%. And it's 35% of a much lower number than is needed to hit the population target. So certainly you can see the evolution of the housing, the pattern of housing, but there needs to be many more cranes in the sky, so to speak, in the downtown areas every year to 2051 than what the city has right now in order to meet that. Certainly the city's plan has a very detailed and progressive plan for achieving and promoting intensification. There are all sorts of strategic growth areas set out in the city to promote higher density units around transit stations and nodes and corridors. And the city's done some great work to put infrastructure plans in place to make sure that these can happen, and a development charge bylaw to make sure that it's properly paid for, and so on and so forth. So I just want to emphasize that this is an ambitious plan. It represents a truly transformational pattern of growth moving forward, and we can start to see the evolution of this plan taking place on the ground. And I now want to move to the greenfield areas, which is where the other 50% of the units need to be accommodated. So most of the greenfield land, as you know, in Barrie is in the southern part of the city. It's within the sort of the areas bounded by the red lines here. There's lots of green, which is sort of non-developable land, environmentally protected land. And you can see here these areas covered by the green hatching, which covers about 50% of the greenfield areas in the south. This hatching represents lands where there are active development applications. So we have a pretty good idea of how the greenfield might develop because there's so many of these applications, both in the sort of the form and the density of what's being planned for. So just a reminder then, so we need 31,000 units within that greenfield area. There's about 17,000 units that have either been built or are under review in the application sort of status. Of the 4,000 units that have been built, 11% are apartments. And of the 13,000 that are in the application review stage, about 45% of those are apartments. So there is a disconnect between what is actually being built as apartments and what is in the plans to be built as apartments under review. And we think it's a legitimate question as to whether this level of apartment construction is sustainable in the greenfield, given what's actually happening. But more importantly is what's required on the remaining vacant lands. So these are lands with no applications at all. There's about 350 hectares of them, and the city would need to squeeze 14,200 units on that vacant land in order to achieve its target. And the question is whether that is possible. And I think our conclusion is that it's probably not. But how much land the city is short rather depends upon a few assumptions about, density, the reasonable density we might expect in the greenfield areas on those vacant lands. So we've done two scenarios here. One assumes that in the scenario one here assumes that the 50% intensification is achieved and that the units that are in the application review stage get built exactly the way they're planned. So 45% of them are apartments. And that level of density, which is very, very high, continues on those vacant lands, those 350 hectares. If that was to play itself out, the city would be short of land, 265 hectares. Scenario two, we think, is important to test because we think this is a more realistic view of what might actually happen. Again, with this scenario, we assume the 50% intensification is achieved. But here we assume that the units in the applications and the units on the vacant lands get built at the kinds of densities that we would see in very dense GTA suburbs. And under that scenario, the city is short about 630 hectares. So just want to summarize by saying that, like other municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, Barrie is planning for much more compact development, more intensification. It's got a very ambitious plan, and we can see the fruits of that plan playing themselves out on the ground. But the intensification rate that's currently being achieved is lower than what's required, and with much higher growth that is needed. And on the greenfield lands, the density of development needs to be much higher than anywhere else in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and certainly very different from what is being constructed in the city. And just to give you a flavor of the scale of the difference here, we estimate that on those vacant lands, the 350 hectares, the city would need to build, communities that have about 100 people and jobs per hectare. And when you compare that to what's being planned for elsewhere in the GTA, you can see that the equivalent figures in York Region would be anywhere between 55 and 70 people and jobs per hectare. It's a little bit higher in Peel, 70. It's a bit lower in Durham Region, 53. But very importantly in Simcoe County, in Springwater and to the south, 45 to 55. About half of the density is being planned for in those areas. And this is important because these areas are part of the same housing market as Barrie. So, want to emphasize the point here. If Barrie's supply cannot meet the demand for the type of housing that people want to buy in the Greenfield area, they will not forego a single detached home and live in an apartment. They are far more likely to buy a single detached home in a neighboring municipality, either Innisfil or Springwater or some other municipality. So that's the risk there that we see in doing this. Just want to finish up with some concluding remarks about the townships. So Oro-Medonte's community area land needs are sufficient to accommodate the growth that is being planned for under the county official plan. The county forecast is forecasting a slight shift towards higher density forms, but ultimately there is none of that is premised on a sort of a huge shift towards a more urban settlement area structure than what currently exists in Oro-Medonte. It would still remain a sort of a very different kind of more rural place than certainly the city of Barrie. And indeed, in Springwater, Elmvale currently is the only service settlement area. But of course, there are big plans for the Midhurst secondary plan area. And there's a lot of land, vacant land, approved land in that area. We think it's enough to accommodate all the demand to 2051, regardless of whether Midhurst proceeds faster than what's expected under the county official plan. You can see here, though, that what's in the Springwater development pipeline is quite significant. Lots of development there. How quickly it proceeds is very much an open question, but certainly the township has done a lot of work to put into all the infrastructure pieces in place to allow this stuff to proceed. So just, Mr. Mayor, wanted to conclude with our findings. We think the case for additional lands for Barrie is relatively weak if we're only talking about employment areas, but there's a relatively strong case for Barrie needing more land for housing. And if annexation is going to occur to the extent that, that's sort of once in a generation kind of exercise, that should probably be done in a comprehensive way that includes provisions for employment areas that meet needs beyond the 2051 timeframe. And we've got two scenarios here then that would pick up both community area and employment area land needs, about 2/3, 1/3 ratio in both cases. Scenario one, based on the plan, Barrie densities would be about just under 400 hectares. And then the scenario two, which we think is a bit more realistic in terms of the kinds of densities in the greenfield areas, with 930 hectares. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we were asked to sort of speak a little bit about options for dealing with this. And there are, of course, many options, but it's at sort of broadest level, there are two pathways here. One is to say that, the current municipal boundaries as they are stay fixed. And we think what would happen in that case is that Barrie's residential growth would continue as it currently is. It would become denser as time went on, but you would reach a point probably in the mid-2030s where growth started to slow because you couldn't meet the demand for the full range of housing that is needed. In that case, some of the demand would shift and some housing options that are unavailable in Barrie would be absorbed by the surrounding municipalities. In such a case, it's quite possible that Barrie may have excess capacity in its municipal systems and facilities, and it would certainly continue to service surrounding areas as a regional service center for major health and education institutions. That would lead to the need for developing servicing agreements, cost-sharing agreements for services with neighboring municipalities, and ultimately some kind of regional governance model to manage growth and manage the complexity of those agreements. The section pathway would be to follow options that look at adjusting municipal boundaries. Certainly growth could continue within the study area under this scenario, but in order for Barrie to achieve its population target, that would involve the need for additional lands, some kind of annexation scenario. But exactly how those are configured requires additional analysis of engineering, servicing requirements, financial impacts on all the municipalities involved, and so on and so forth. And we've been asked to prepare a sort of a high-level work plan that might flesh out what might be required for that stage 3 work, and that would engage a range of experts, including civil engineers and natural heritage experts, and some forecasting and municipal finance as well. But we have those on the team waiting to do the work as necessary, and we will do the work plan in short order. So, Mr. Mayor, that concludes my remarks, and I'm of course happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stefan, for the presentation. Certainly a lot of information for all 3 councils and the County of Simcoe to chew on, if you will. And I'm going to, if it's okay with members of council, I'm going to lead off the questioning here. I know that I've been most involved in this along with our Chief Administrative Officer. I'm going to ask you, if you could, to go to the map that showed the different areas the City of Barrie originally requested. Okay. And I'm going to ask our clerk, can you share the map that the City of Barrie originally put forward? No, the one with the 5 areas there. Madam Clerk, no problem. We'll just wait a moment for that to come up. Okay, thank you. So, Stefan, can you see this or no? Stefan, did we lose you there?
Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
We can now, yes, sir. Are you able to
yes,
see
I can see the map, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So on the map that you've shown, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 5 are present, but 4 is not present. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to, there's been some confusion on this. And before I move on to explain this, I just want to ask Stefan, the map that didn't include number 4, was that provided by the Township of Springwater?
The map that does not include number 4?
Yes.
That was the map that was, I believe, presented by the city to Springwater Council in November 2023.
Did Springwater provide that information to you, that this was that was the request that had been given to them by the City of Barrie?
They confirmed that was the presentation that was made to their council. Yes.
Okay, I believe that presentation was made confidentially. Number 1, in a confidential meeting. So I'm not sure if that township has released those meeting minutes along with all of the information encompassed in it. But for the record, we should note that this other map that's being used was part of a confidential presentation to Springwater Township. And so before I get on to asking further questions, I think I should probably explain this to the rest of members of council, because you voted on a map and you voted on allowing us to go and negotiate. Number 1 is Oro-Medonte. That's the block we'll get to in a second with Stefan. Number 2 is Little Lake, and that is the area where we're hoping to bring into the city of Barrie. We own most of the land except for 2 parcels in this area, at least the pieces that immediately surround Little Lake, and our goal is to work with the province on conservation in that area. Number 3 was actually proposed by, not by us, let me put it that way. And so if you want to know who it's proposed by, Springwater Township will either have to release the minutes or you can ask them. Number 4 was asked by Springwater at a previous meeting to when we made the presentation to be removed before we made the presentation because they felt it would be very offensive to some members of council there. And number 5 was brought forward by, again, not us. We need to ask Springwater Council who wanted to look at number 5. So just to put in perspective on the map and the other map that's in the report, that is what has been floating around, and that's why numbers 3 and 5 are in there, and why number 4 was not. And so I want to make sure that we're completely transparent with our council and the public as to what was being talked about, how it was being talked about, and the reasons for that. I'll now ask you to bring up the map of Oro-Medonte in the presentation from Stefan.
Thank you. Before we move on, either now, before you move into the Oro-Medonte parcel conversation, just to clarify, while you've talked about 2 different maps being shared, confidential or not, the one that's actually in the package, is that what's on the table for conversations with the province, or is the one that's being displayed the one that we need to be paying attention to tonight, and that's a comprehensive look at all aspects of the potential boundary changes?
So you're asking me, I'm going to speak for me and then Stefan. I think if you ask Stefan, he would say the one that shows the light colored area right around the whole northern border of the city, because the stage where they estimated what the need is complete, but the stage where they are estimating what the lands are is not. Okay. So that's from the inside the presentation. But the map that was showing a request from the city of Barrie inside the presentation is actually inaccurate of what our originating ask was. And there was a piece that was taken out as part of a request prior to going to Springwater Council. Okay. And there were 2 pieces that were added in that weren't in the original request that I brought before with Michael to our council. And so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because there has been some changes to that map over time in different iterations. And what's reflected inside of the PowerPoint presentation is not reflective of what council originally saw, neither is it reflective of the accurate Barrie ask.
So to clarify then, for this evening's conversations or questions, is there anything out of scope for us to be asking questions on regarding the parcels based on the one that you've displayed? Is that
no, you can
open for conversation?
For sure,
okay,
for sure. Okay. Is it clarification?
Actually, I was just going to ask if we could put the map back up.
Yes, we're going to put up the Oro-Medonte map first, and then we can bring that back and forth. Yeah. Could we share the presentation from earlier again there, Madame Clerk? I'm sorry. Oh, Stefan, could you share your presentation, your screen again? Wonderful. That was the map I was referring to. There's one that's just the Oro-Medonte piece that's in orange, I believe. And it shows the natural heritage area as well. Right there. Yeah, perfect. So in this portion, it says that Barrie's employment needs, specifically in the short term, I think it's referring to, can't be dealt with inside of this area? Because it's not for servicing sake. So what was the issue there?
Mr. Mayor, certainly there are water and sewer pipes along Penetanguishing Road. But I think that when you look at those lands and you think about what they might develop at and might need once they're developed for employment uses, there's a certain amount of time that's required for the planning of the lands and for infrastructure improvements to the road network within those areas, subdivision of lands, and certainly the intersection with the highway, which involves right now a 180-degree single lane turn ending in a T-junction with a church and a cemetery and a sort of bridge underpass under the highway. So it's a complicated area up by Napoleon there for just one truck to get in and off the highway. So there are things that need to be done to these lands other than just hooking up to the water and sewer pipes that are available on Penetanguishing Road, we think.
Right, and I believe that the Penetanguishing intersection is about 3.7 kilometers, maybe 3.5 kilometers from the current City of Barrie border, which is not far from the northern edge of that yellowish area there. Did you calculate that about the same?
I'm just looking at the scale on the map here, and I think that's about right. It may even be less than that, yeah.
Okay. And would there be upgrades required on Georgian Drive?
Honestly, I'm not sure that I can be definitive about the scale of the infrastructure needs that are required. That I think would need some sort of qualified engineer and would be part of the stage 3 work.
Right. So we have a 4-lane road there that's 2.2 kilometers from the same piece of property that goes on to one of the most updated intersections on the 400 series highway. Is that correct?
I'll take your word for it, Mr. Mayor. But...
Okay. My other question I have for you is, are you aware that the City of Barrie's been granted strong mayor powers?
I am aware, yes.
Yeah. I understand the designation in a typical plan takes an extended period of time. Are you aware of the timeline it would take? Now, let's pretend it's not employment and it's just residential. Are you aware of the timeline that it takes to work through the strong mayor powers to designate properties for development?
I'm not.
Okay. The current, what's happened in other municipalities is essentially 30 days, 21 days to 30 days is required for notice to the public. You can hold your public meeting. Once a public meeting is completed, at that point, the strong mayor powers can be used, and there would be 15 days beyond that to for council to veto. So essentially, in 60 days, we could designate that what is needed. Now, that's not my preferred direction. I'll just be clear with council and the public, but the timelines associated, I thought were interesting. The other question I had is, what is the Oro people and jobs per hectare number? Because we saw Springwater, we saw Barrie, we saw Markham, we saw lots of GTA, but what's Oro-Medonte's?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mr. Mayor. They don't actually have one because they don't have any designated greenfield area under the growth plan. So there isn't a target for any greenfield area for Oro-Medonte under the county official.
And do they have a housing target then?
They don't actually have a housing target. They have a population target.
Okay. And do they have an employment target?
They have an employment target. Yes, they do.
Okay. And that's the lands that showed in the map, really showed it around line 7 and the airport road.
Well, the majority of their employment would be on those employment areas, but there would also be employment associated with the community areas retail stuff and some rural. There's some rural employment as well in tourism related stuff in Oro as well. So, but the majority would be on the employment areas.
Okay. I'm going to jump over to the report on the existing city of Barrie because I think there was some, there's certainly some confusion. There was a request by our Chief Administrative Officer prior to this meeting asking about the annexed area, or not annexed area, hopefully annexed area if you're sitting where we are, that talks about, is it developable acreage and hectarage that you're speaking of, or is it total? And I think that may have been confused in the presentation here because I don't believe that question was asked by our staff with regards to the existing city boundary today. There was a request given in that looked at our current city lands and asked what were the properties that were studied to determine what the developable areas were that were left inside of Barrie for industrial purposes. And I believe, Stefan, you sent that over to us maybe Monday or Sunday, something like that. So thanks for the quick turnaround because it was only on the weekend that I asked for it. What I looked, everything, just to be honest with everyone, I don't know a lot of the properties because it says the legal description. I don't have the time to look up this legal description. So I looked for some properties that I already knew. And I'll give you an example, a couple of examples actually. CTV and Madam Clerk, I think you have the CTV one here. We're going to kick him off again, aren't we? It's nothing personal, Stefan. We're not meaning to kick you off. So my understanding is that the piece that you see on this map, that is to the east of Beacon Road, that's wide open, is the current CTV studios and land. And then the rest of it around has some sort of green and purple to it, which I believe indicates some sort of environmental sensitivities. Ms. Banfield, can you confirm that for us?
Mayor Nuttall, you're correct. Any of the properties that you see with that kind of underlying or overlying hatching are just represent different levels of environmental protection. So level 1, 2, and in some cases 3.
Thank you so much for confirming that. So I'm very dangerous with our Barrie GIS and the Simcoe County GIS. So please don't get me down to the acre because I will undoubtedly be wrong. But that portion of property that is the current station area, I had a count of 22 acres in size. But the spreadsheet that showed the developable area was 26.47 hectares in size, or I believe about 60 acres. Is 26 hectares, 60 acres, Ms. Banfield, is that right? Ish. So I was only able to look at 3 because I only knew 3 properties. This one was roughly a third of what was in the spreadsheet. Innisbrook Golf Course is designated, and we don't need to pull up, we can go over another time, but Innisbrook Golf Course, which is mostly designated environmentally sensitive area with creeks running through it and a lot of a lot of Deputy Mayor Thompson's golf balls. Ravines everywhere, trees. It's designated here to say that there would be 30-ish hectares of industrial land there. 30 hectares, I think, gets about 70 acres if I'm calculating it right. And that property, I think that we've identified about between 5 and 10 acres of available use. And then the other property was the Pope lands, which we've looked at, and about, we believe there's somewhere in the 40 acres out of that 70 that's available for use. So when we're looking at the actual numbers that are being provided on this for the employment inside of the city of Barrie, the 3 parcels that I could actually even identify have come back anywhere from a third to a half of what is said to be ready for industrial development. Is there any way that we can take a second look at that, sir?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. And if I may just perhaps lay out exactly how we came to our supply figure. So if lands were designated for environmental use or natural heritage system, they were not included in our supply numbers. But what we also did was we looked at all lands that were designated for employment use, and we either visited the sites or we looked at them, we looked at photographs of them, and we excluded ourselves areas that we thought had some kind of environmental constraints on them. So I certainly think it's important that our assumptions about what is available for use are tested by staff and that they match with staff's understanding about what's on the ground. And we're certainly happy to do that. But I just want to be clear that we did not include any lands that were designated for NHS constraints. And to the extent that we were able to check ourselves, we did so and excluded further lands. But I'm not sure about what's on screen right now. If for further reference, map 3 in our report depicts where the lands that we've excluded from the vacant supply.
Thank you, Ms. Banfield.
Thanks, Mayor Nuttall. So in this instance, for this particular property, you can see the underlying zoning is the purple color. So I think what Hemson is suggesting is they might not have captured this one because the zoning is actually employment lands, but we know that there's the different overlays that would impact, even though the zoning says industrial, we know that if an application came in, we'd have to define the feature, and we'd have to potentially, it's not even just so much about defining the feature, is the fact that often you have to keep a distance from the feature, and then that's when the actual developable land gets smaller than the net, the big parcel. And the only piece that you actually see that doesn't have that imprint or any sort of is actually the existing studio. Everything else around it has some impact. There was, just again, because we're talking about numbers, there was an old draft plan that ultimately expired, but it was at about 35% of the whole parcel was going to be impacted by these features, and then again, possibly more when they were actually defined and dedicated and rezoned and all those sorts of things.
Thank you. So I guess I don't want to go too far on one property. I looked at 3 properties. I found 3 issues. There's probably 75 of them that don't have any issues, and I'm all good with that. I don't think that the mayor should be the one who determines whether it is or isn't, but somebody's got to come with the science that says that the information that's being provided is 100% accurate. And if it is 100% accurate, then we fully endorse it, and if it needs to be corrected, then we need it to be corrected. But I'll leave that point there. Can I jump over to the slide with regards to the residential growth that says essentially does compare? And I'm sorry, Stefan, we're going to have to ask you to share your screen again. That shows the residential numbers for the different municipalities.
Is it this one, Mr. Mayor?
Sorry, could you share your screen again if that's okay? Because it keeps kicking you off every time there we go. Perfect. Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes. So I think at this point you had said, and I'm not sure if it's on the screen now or not, but you had said that the city of Barrie would need to be 100 persons and jobs per hectare in order to make up the ground and meet the provincial growth targets by 2051. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is our estimate of what the density might reasonably need to be on the vacant lands where there's no current applications.
Amazing, thank you. I wanted to ask you in Vaughan and Markham. I mean, I think those are big cities with big buildings and lots going on. How difficult do you think it would be for us to actually hit the provincial targets, given that we need to be almost 50% more dense on the remaining lands than those cities are?
Extremely difficult, Mr.
Would you say it's impossible?
Well, I wouldn't want to say anything's impossible. And remember, we're looking like 25 years into the future. So, I mean, all of these are estimates, but I would say that it would not be prudent to plan now on the basis of this happening.
Right. Thank you. And then the final slide where you showed, it may not be the final, maybe the second final, the one where you showed the two scenarios, where there's the scenario for our housing catching up on a little bit more, and then there's the scenario that you thought was a little bit more rational and likely. It's slide 25. Councillor Congo, you're good at this.
I'm listening.
So on this slide, it's scenario 2 that you're saying is more likely what the need is, just based on the density targets, etc. And in there, you've also identified that there needs to be about 300 hectares of employment land. And I, to members of council, I had said it was 2/3, 1/3. It looks like a little bit less than that when it's on the screen here. 630 for community area, which is residential, and then 300 for employment need, for a total of 930 hectares. And sorry, I just want to put it in a language I think at least I deal with more commonly, which would be acres. So 930 hectares is around 2,298 acres. Is that around right, CAO?
Mayor Nuttall, in the interest of time, I can confirm your calculation. It's just shy of 2,300 acres, yes.
And Stefan, if I could ask this question, because we did ask this privately, and so I just want to make sure we ask this publicly. This 2,298 acres is of designated usable land and does not include natural heritage or environmentally protected lands. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm going to give up the microphone. There'll be some very relieved individuals, both on TV and in the chambers. And we're going to ask members of council, to start with Councillor Riepma. Any other? Councillor Harvey? Okay, Councillor Riepma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just staying with that slide, page 26, yeah. Earlier on in your presentation, you said that there was no real case for additional industrial land in Barrie. And here on this slide, you're suggesting we need another 300 hectares.
Point of order, Mayor Lehman. It's been a long day. Mayor Nuttall, point of order.
Yes, Councillor.
Through you, if I can, to the speaker right now. Councillor Rima, don't you do planning consultant work for industrial developers in in the south end, south of Barrie. I just wanted to address that specifically to the question you're asking to staff. So, Mayor Nuttall, I don't know if that's kind of, conflict of interest or pecuniary interest. Excuse me.
I'll leave conflicts to individual members to work out with our integrity commissioner. I'm not the speaker with regards to conflicts of interest, but I do manage the meeting, so I will leave that to Councillor Ritma to determine and go forth from there.
This is a general question. Doesn't have anything to do with projects that I may or may not be working on at the moment in other municipalities. So I don't think there's a conflict myself, but I could check with the Integrity Commissioner if you felt that would be important.
Mayor Nuttall,
This is just to clarify some of the numbers on the.
If I still have the floor through Mayor Nuttall, the reason I bring this up, the speaker has a point about specific projects, but this is about macro policy. So, for example, in previous vote a couple months ago, I thought I didn't have a conflict of interest on the CIP. The Integrity Commissioner told me that I did. I thought it was a general questions about a general policy that everybody has access to, and she specifically said you do. So because we're talking about annexation as do we annex up to the north, it's realistic for someone to presume that if we do annex lands for the purpose of industrial to the north, there'll be less pent-up demand in the south, and vice versa. That's why I wanted to obviously call the point of order before I don't want another wrench in this whole process to be like, hey, there was an improper discussion theoretically. So that's why the due diligence is needed on this specifically, because I also thought I had absolutely no conflict on the CIP, and she deemed it on the writing of the CIP because we were revising a couple months ago, and she deemed that I did.
If you could just give me a moment, please. So I've just confirmed I can't rule on a conflict of interest, whether there is one or isn't one. Councillor Ritma, there's been a point brought up. I'm going to leave that to you. If you decide not to ask the question, you can still ask the question of Hemson through email as an individual resident, but after having declared if there is a conflict. And if there's not, you can just ask the question anyway. So I'll leave it to you, but I can't give a judgment.
I understand that, Mr. Mayor, and out of an abundance of caution, I won't ask the question. But I'm assuming, like I do industrial work only, so if I switch to residential, I'm thinking that should be all right. I think, anyway.
Like, I wish I could say I think so too, but I don't want to indicate something that isn't accurate. So I apologize.
All right. Well, maybe I can ask this question. In terms of the residential, are you working with the number of 350 or rather 300,000 population for City Barrie in 2051? Is that the number that you're working with?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a number I should know off the top of my head, but I don't without looking it up in the report. But suffice to say that whatever the population target is for the city of Barrie in 2051 in your official plan, that's the number that we've used to assess land.
Okay, all right. So that's 298,000, I think.
Right.
I guess the question that I would put to you is that number realistic? given your comments that we're not hitting our housing targets, our population targets now, and given that we're not having enough babies to keep our population stable, and so growth in Canada is really dependent on what the level of immigration is going to be. So I'm wondering if you have any particular insight into what the level of immigration is going to be in the future, because that's going to drive our population increase, I would think, and will determine what kind of housing we need as well. So any thoughts on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for such an easy question. So a couple of things, I guess. The population figure that was established for the city's official plan was a target that was established as part of the now defunct provincial growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And that forecast was done some years ago, around 2019, 2020, based largely on 2016 census data. So it is a little bit out of date. However, it was premised on, in large part, on fertility and mortality trends that were present at the time. And so, those won't have changed too much between then and now. But they also would have incorporated assumptions about migration as well. And on the immigration side of things, those forecasts would have predated the significant increase in immigration targets that were implemented by the federal government over the last few years. And so the recent announcements that those immigration targets are to be reduced in the next few years brings those targets much more into line with the targets that were assumed when the 298,000 was established. But of course, the main source of growth in Barrie is not people having babies, and it's not so much immigration. It is the migration of people from the GTA northward to the city. And that is still and will continue to be the major source of population and housing growth in the city over the long term and future. And how that might change, a lot of that has got to do with the supply of land for housing in the city. So I was sort of being a bit facetious when I said it was an easy question. It's an extremely difficult question. We did not, as part of the stage of the work, try to update the long-term forecast for the city of Barrie because we wanted to work within the framework of your official plan, because a lot is tied to that. If the city feels that it's an important part of the stage 3 work to revise that forecast, we certainly have the expertise to do that work. But I think we'd need direction and agreement from the participating municipalities that was an element of the work.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I'll leave the rest of my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm now going to go to Councillor Harvey.
Actually, I no longer have a question as I, through the conversation, was able to get the answer that I needed. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? I think, Councillor Corso, you wanted to ask about the map earlier. Do you want me to have that brought back up?
Yes, please, if you could.
Wonderful. Madam Clerk, we're testing you tonight, aren't we? The one with all five pieces. The one with all the five. Oh, sorry. Okay, wonderful. Is it on the 5 pieces or on the report? Okay. Stefan, I'm just going to put you on deck that you're going to have to add yourself again after we remove this this map for the 3rd time,
Yeah,
which
sure.
is probably my fault, Stefan, because I should have just answered the question earlier. Councillor Corser.
I just wanted to get a better view of where the locations are.
Yeah, if you like, we can have Madame Clerk circulate that to you as well.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, Stefan, back to you. So we're going to remove the map now from the screen, and then you'll have to continue to be a caring person and share your screen.
I am. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, Councillor Hamilton, it's you.
Sorry, thank you, and through you, Mayor Nuttall. I want to go back to, I think, an important point that you made as I'm trying to digest all of this, because I'm feeling a little bit perplexed. While I appreciate the report and the presentation tonight, so it's my question that I was hoping to have answered through all of this is having a good understanding of what our current state of employment lands is, so we can look to see if we are going to be meeting future need based on future growth. So for that, we need to know where do we sit currently, what employment lands are available, versus where do we need to be by 2051. But I'm left feeling not knowing our current state, considering that the assessment they did just looked at the zoning of employment lands, but didn't actually look at what is developable land. And the 3 that you checked were not congruent. There was obviously some discrepancies there. And so you mentioned that you would work with staff, and I'm just wondering at what point that happens. To me, I'm feeling a little bit underwhelmed in the sense that we've just spent a lot of money on a consultation report, and it missed, to me, what I think is a key piece. So is this something that's left to a phase 3? Is this something that gets dealt with now that consultants will go back and rectify what I think is a pretty large omission? So just wanted to understand what the next steps would be on that piece.
And Councillor Hamilton, I think, to be fair, right, there's a plethora of incredible work here. There was like I could only check 3 because I just don't know how to check the legal address. So I think that as part of stage 3, we could ask that the direction include verification of the current needs for the city of Barrie for a future staff report that'll come back. And I think that we need that verification no matter what. And it may be that maybe our environmental mapping is wrong, right? Like there's lots of things that could be the reason, but I just want to make sure that we have it all completely correct. And I know you do from just hearing from you. So we're going to give direction out tonight in the direct motion portion of the evening, and you could add that in as an amendment if that is something you would like to.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is a big decision, right? And I think, as I said, the whole intent of this report, in my opinion, was to actually understand what the need is, right? If Barrie needs to enhance its boundaries, expand our boundaries because we don't have enough existing supply, and it didn't seem to answer the question. So even to have to move to a phase 3, it just seems to me we've missed some key information here. And I'm not negating the fact that there was a ton of good information done here, and this is a very complex question, but I think this is ultimately the question that most residents, and I know I'm only speaking on behalf of, we're 10, like this is what we're interested in knowing. The other piece, and I will fully admit, I don't have a planning background, so I'm also just trying to understand this from an average layperson's lens. But just in terms of the definition of employment lands, and I know we briefly touched upon this, but I've tried to look into a little bit. So I understand the definition of employment lands has recently changed in October. And I'm just wondering, maybe I'll direct this question to Ms. Banfield. I'm assuming that this report is also using the new definition of employment lands, which refers in what I believe is just to employment lands that are used for manufacturing purposes, and remove some of the entry-level employment type businesses that we would have seen in the previous definition.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Hamilton, you'd have to ask, I think, Hemson what they, if they took out the different definition. I would suspect they have not, because they've been working on this for months, and the definition just changed, as I said, at the end of October. So I would suspect they've included, in terms of the designation, it's the employment area designation, the employment non-employment, non-industrial employment, and then restricted industrial. So restricted employment. So those are kind of the designations in the official plan. So I would suspect that that's what Hemson used, and understanding with the change coming forward, that's something that staff are going to have to bring back to council. The practical implications of that policy change by the province is that some of those those industrial employment areas that look a little bit more quasi-retail, most likely, we haven't quite gotten to the end result, but most likely are going to look more like a commercial designation versus employment. So as again, we're not there, we're not at that end result, but ultimately that's one of the biggest changes, is that from an employment land perspective, it's going to have to be a bit more pure employment, jobs, factories, data centers, distribution centers, those types of things, whereas some of the more, as I said, quasi-retail, most likely would be looking to move to a commercial zone.
So if I may, through you, so I think that's a very important nuance, because again, as I think we're looking to the future, we are really trying to look at industrial land, right? And this is really looking at more the commercial type uses. So that distinction, I hope, will be captured, and I'm not sure if it can be in phase 3 activities, or I don't know what the timeline is.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Hamilton, it really is a bigger conversation, and I don't want to belabor it here, but I mean, it is going to impact our total numbers, for sure. It's going to impact our total jobs. And then there also is a change in the provincial policy statement, the planning policy statement, that looks at the ability to do employment land conversions, which under the growth plan, you could never do unless you did a municipal comprehensive review. And that has also changed, which ultimately could put more pressure on our employment lands in the future, because where we used to be able to say, nope, you can't do an employment land conversion because of the growth plan, we don't have that anymore. And if we are approached, we're going to have to process that and deal with that as a staff, and it's going to be a council decision as well. So it's very complex, and I don't want to muddy the waters further here, but there's so many pressures on employment land that we do have, and that's not going to change in the future. It's probably going to be more pressure.
So thank you for that, because I think that's really helpful background and context for at least us to be aware of. I know there's a lot of moving parts, and I think I'll just say I'm glad I'm not sitting where you are at this point, Ms. Banfield, or Mr. Hemson. I do understand the nuances here, but again, I think context is important. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you.
I have Councillor Morales and then Councillor Harris. Councillor Morales, do you mind if I just ask a follow-up quickly on that? Do we have any indication on what that change would mean in percentage of our industrial lands at this point? Like, is it 5% or is it 50%? Or is it, we'll get back to you later on? You'll get back to us later on. Okay, wonderful. Over to Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Typed up a couple good questions here. Thank you for the comments, questions and comments, Councillor Hamilton. I definitely appreciate the comments that were said earlier on the moving targets on immigration numbers. Hopefully those, go down. I'll just be blunt, not adjusted. We are definitely in a housing shortage, housing crisis. But regardless, wherever the immigration numbers go, I think it just needs to be clearly stated. So I'll state it for myself that we just need more housing. And I think if anybody has any questions that maybe we won't need as much housing in Barrie, I think just ask any 22 to 35-year-old with a university degree that's living in your basement. Just simple as that. Ask them, do we need more housing? Because they can't get the $800 a month cheap basement apartments anymore. They can't even get the they can't even get the $1,800 for a full house. Rental, and they can't even qualify to buy their own house. I have and it's not just a Ward 1 thing. I have residents in my ward, Mayor Nuttall, who have been longtime residents. They lived on Big Bay Point for 24 years, for 37 years. That house back when Big Bay Point was 2. They have Western educated engineers, accountants, and this is just more than just one example. And they make $90,000 to $140,000. They can't qualify for housing to buy. So I'm glad that it had the effect in the room right now that it did. So here's my question to the presenter. You commented that it's always a good idea to have, and I'm kind of paraphrasing the words here, but you made a general comment that it's always a good idea to have a delta of a surplus of employment land capacity. Is that correct? Just confirming? To have a little bit more than possibly need, to have some flexibility. correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's always good to have choice for someone who wants to locate in the city.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I have a perspective on why that is, but obviously you had a long presentation, lots of great material. Could you elaborate a little bit specifically on why you feel this is important, that choice for the market, the interests, the reality?
Well, again, through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, the needs are different for different types of industries and different types of businesses. So, if you've only got one site that's vacant and available, then that may not cater to the needs of all the people who might be interested in locating in the city. So, not everyone needs the same size of land, the same configuration, the same access to the highway, the same location near another type of industry, is delivering trucks north of the city rather than south of the city. So, the needs are varied, and therefore the supply needs to reflect that diversity.
Perfect. So would it be fair to characterize some of the sentiment you just expressed as with planning macro policy like this, things don't really go according to plan? The market doesn't respond as quickly or as fast as it does, whether it's residential. How long did we wait for the secondary plan lands to finally go onto grid? We expected them to, developers start building in 2018, didn't really move till 2021, 2022, 2023. So for employment, would it be fair to say that things don't go according to policy? The market doesn't necessarily respond to the planning. As great as the planning may be, things don't necessarily go according to plan. And so again, like you said, there needs to be excess capacity for different interests and appetites.
Yes, I would agree, Mr. Mayor, that another good reason to have some vacant supply is to deal with the fact that estimates that are made 10, 20 years in advance may not be entirely accurate. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Hemson. Those are all the questions for you. I'm just going to close it here with some quick comments. Mayor Nuttall, nothing goes according to plan. The best example I can think of is a Ward 9 one. So the employment needs report policy envisioned Mapleview Drive East in Ward 9. So think of Huronia, the golf range there and the plaza. Envision that to develop out similar to Mapleview Drive West. So think of Canadian Tire, a couple of those factories and warehouses, things of that nature. It envisioned a similar build out. That was an envision that happened late 90s, early, like the single 2000s. It didn't happen. What we ended up seeing in that side of Mapleview Drive was strip plazas and some housing a little bit further east and then nothing else. It didn't get the industrial. And the previous term of council, there was a push to do a land conversion to move it away from industrial, because at that time, there was somebody who wanted to build a grocery store, which was very much needed in Southeast Barrie, and possibly some seniors housing. What I'm getting at is nothing goes according to plan, and when we don't have excess capacity, because going back to the presentation, it's not as strong of an argument as the PowerPoint said. Maybe for industrial, it is for residential, but if you're going to do one, you might as well do all of them. I personally don't want us to miss out on once in a generation opportunities if we don't have the surplus delta. And that may be the next Honda. That may be the next major employer. I'm not talking warehouses. I'm talking careers. I'm talking life-changing opportunities and prosperity for the people of Barrie and the younger generations. And up until 2017, all I ever heard from a Schlichter was, here's another report of city-owned land ready to be sold for industrial. Here's another report, council. Now somebody else wants to buy it. And this is actually a question I'll direct to Mr. Schlichter. Off the top of my head, up until about 2017, I think it was, we had land available. And then there came one of those final reports where you said, that's it. All city-owned holdings meant for industrial are sold. So I guess my question to you is, don't want to put you on the spot, you don't have to tell me a month, but was that roughly 2017, 2018 when that reality came to be?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales. I don't have the data in front of me, but I believe it was prior to 2020, so in that time frame would be close to accurate.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schlichter. And Mayor Nuttall, I joined you last year on a tour of a business on Saunders, right on the border of Ward 9, technically Ward 8. You didn't actually invite me. I was trying to bug you about another issue, and I wouldn't let you go, so you're like, just hop in the car. Because it was a really important issue, and so no members of council feel left out. That's how you do it. And literally it was to talk to you about this issue on the way there and back. And we toured a business, right? And one of the comments about that is how happy they were with the growth they expected. There were a couple local people who were like, in their early 40s. They had gone to high school, local high schools. They were, part of long-term Barrie families. And they said, and it's going so well, we're going to move out of Barrie. Like, we have to go to Craighurst, I think. I'm not going to go into anything specific land details. We'd love to stay in town, but we just can't because we don't have the capacity. And you were like, let's see if we can find you something. Whether, again, we don't have anything in city holdings, but that's unfortunate. And what I remember walking away, I probably stopped bugging you about it. I was trying to bug you, and I said, wow, what a sad reality. They're from Barrie, raised in Barrie, employ some people they even went to high school with. They want to continue growing and providing opportunities, and the reality is they can't. And anyways, that is why, while that summary might say technically the case isn't as strong, more residential, but if you're going to do it all at once, I am supportive of obviously the general intent. I don't want to miss out on once in a lifetime generation opportunities. I know how rigid the land conversion policy is, and rightly so, because we need to protect land for jobs and housing land for housing. But knowing that nothing goes according to plan, and seeing the realities I saw with you when I filibustered my way into your car on a tour, I think this is the right opportunity. I said this on social media a couple days ago. When I meet people in the community, I may know where they're from, but I don't segment people and go, he's from Midhurst, he's from Shanty Bay, he's from Craighurst, he's from the east end of Barrie, no matter how special Ward 1 is. And the reality is, at the end of the day, all these people that are part of our community, they're from the region, if you want to call it. Let's take away the name Barrie. They're part of our community. And so I'm personally not going to let an invisible imaginary line hold back the promise of some potential opportunity for the residents of Barrie and elsewhere. So I'll be supportive of the general intent.
Thank you, Councillor. And Aerox was where we went, and it was you, me, Deputy Mayor, maybe, and maybe Councillor Negussi was there as well. I think, yeah. Councillor Harris, I didn't invite you to your own ward, so I don't know what was wrong with me that day, but there was clearly something wrong with me. I apologize. Over
I was busy at work that day, so that's okay. Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to, and I apologize, I won't attempt your last name, Stefan, so apologies for that. On slide 26, the title kind of caught me as it said, 2 broad options for addressing land needs, and that made me think of the last 2 words, and Barrie needs land. Is that fair as a summary, that in all of what we see here today, that Barrie needs land?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that if Barrie is to achieve the population target in its official plan, it needs more land.
Great, thank you. And on that slide, 26, there's 2 options. And am I correct that they're not provided as recommendations?
They are not recommendations.
Okay, thank you. And on the prior slide, you mentioned the importance of development of complete communities. Of those 2 options, option 1 and option 2, which one is better planning and more likely to create a complete community?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a difficult question to answer, because a complete community is not something that we can measure necessarily, but really what a complete community is describing is a place where people can not just live, but also work fairly close to home, and shop and do all the sort of necessary chores for daily living within a fairly close proximity to their home. And so you do, as part of measuring completeness, if you like, you do want to look at things like the ratio of jobs to people. And that will be different from place to place because, different communities are different, but, you don't want if you have a low ratio of jobs to people, then that's usually a bit of a red flag when looking at completeness. So I'm not sure that I can be definitive about which of these two options is going to be more of a complete community for Barrie or Springwater and Oro-Medonte without a bit more analysis. But certainly option one would translate into Barrie having by 2051 fewer people relative to its job base than option two.
Thank you. And just through you, Mayor Nuttall, would option one be more? Would there be more risk of option one leaning towards like urban sprawl, less defined and clear growth?
Well, again, through you, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize to the councillor, but urban sprawl too is not a very precisely defined term. So I'm a little hesitant to sort of say that one of these options represents sprawl, whereas the other one doesn't, even if it's a matter of degrees. So these two options are perfectly viable options, and there are examples of municipalities that operate with servicing agreements and regional governance, and you can look down to the GTA for a good example of that. And there are other jurisdictions where the general pattern of growth is that the large city just annexes land every time it needs it and grows outwards, like the city of Calgary. So, these are perfectly reasonable options based, and they can both be based on good planning principles, provided they're done properly, and of course the devil's in the details in some respects. But we certainly wouldn't want to imply that one of these options is deficient because it's going to result in sprawl.
All right, and maybe one further question is, again, this is not my area of expertise in any way, shape, or form, so thank you for all of your answers. Next steps, final slide, it talks about discuss possible stage 3 work. Will the work in stage 3 help us to get some of those answers of clarity around whether option 1 or option 2 would be the preferred option for, as you noted in slide 25, developing a more complete community?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. That would be the overarching goal of stage 3, not just to decide which of these two options is preferred, but also if it's going to be option 2, what kind of configuration and size of annexation area might be, great, and the location.
Great, thank you.
Members of council, any other questions? Councillor Negussi.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. We're talking about employment land, but I believe we miss one thing about our residents who are working outside of their city. So my question to Stephen is there an estimate for the number of residents who travel and work outside of the 3 municipalities? Do you have any number?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have a number off the top of my head looking at all 3 municipalities, but I can just speak, if I may, very briefly about commuting patterns in the city of Barrie. So Barrie is a rather interesting place from a commuting perspective. There's a significant amount of people who, leave Barrie in the morning and drive south to a job. There's an almost equivalent number of people who arrive in Barrie from the northern part, from north of the city, to work in Barrie. So the actual net commuting in Barrie is almost zero, because you get the same number of people coming in from the north to work as do leave to work in the south.
Okay. Mayor Nuttall, I recall you mentioning that approximately 20,000 cars are leaving our city in daily work purpose.
I think over 30 minutes was 40,000 vehicles, and I'm going on memory from 2 years ago, and I don't know what COVID has done to those numbers, but that was probably 2019, census, if that was the year, maybe it was 2020 census.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I asked our staff, Bala, and he assisted me with that 40,000. Thank you, Bala. Can you put that document on the screen, please? I would like to share a document with the audience and those who are watching from home. Just from the environmental perspective, the carbon emission for one car traveling from Barrie to Toronto and back are approximately 0.5% metric ton carbon dioxide. This figure is based on just a medium car size. With 40,000 cars making the trip, the total carbon emission amount is about 2,000 metric ton per day, 10,000 metric tons weekly, and about 480,000 metric tons annually. This number is only from our city, from the city of Barrie to close to Toronto. But it can be assumed that it will be higher when the numbers are from the two municipalities are added. So imagine if we resolve this boundary issue and create a minimum of 10,000 jobs within the next few years, we could reduce 1/4 of the carbon emission problem. And we can give a better hope for our young generation as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, I think I want to, if I can, Councillor Morales, because we're in a presentation piece, and I've been really, really, really liberal in interpreting the laws here. So I think that we should proceed from the presentation to the direct motion so that the actual debate portion can happen. And I would like to thank Stefan, I'd like to thank you. I was unable to say your last name, so you were adopted Hemson tonight, I noticed a couple of times. This is not Mr. Hemson, although you'll probably get teased at work now being Mr. Hemson. So, Stefan, thank you to you and your team, because I know you obviously were the lead, but you had lots of other people helping and working this through, including our facilitator who's been working with the City of Barrie, with Springwater Township, with Oro-Medonte, with the County of Simcoe through this process. And, you know, I know how difficult it is getting scrutinized by one set of politicians, but you just got scrutinized by 4 sets of politicians in, I think, about 4 or 5 hours, Stefan, if I'm not mistaken. And that is a feat that I never want to have to go through myself. So thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you to your team. Thank you for the information and the depth, because it was very deep. And while there's some things that I just didn't know or understand, I think it's really important that you've provided that information to all of us, because we can use good information to make good decisions. And I really believe that you've been able to do that for us here tonight. So thank you so much, Stefan, for your presentation and work.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We're going to move past this point to direct motions, as we had amended the agenda for this evening, and I believe Deputy Mayor Thompson has a without notice motion. Okay, Deputy Mayor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Harvey, that pursuant to Section 7.1 of the Procedural Bylaw 2019-100 as amended, permission to be granted to introduce a motion without notice concerning joint land need assessment.
It's moved by Deputy Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Harvey, that pursuant to Section 7.1 of the Procedural Bylaw 2019-100 as amended, permission be granted to introduce a motion without notice concerning joint land needs assessment. Are there any questions or comments with regards to the direct motion without notice from members of council? I'm seeing none. All those in favor? It carries. Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Harvey. Whereas the city of Barrie and forecasted to experience significant population employment growth to 2051. And whereas to address this growth, Hemson Consulting was jointly retained to evaluate the needs for additional employment and residential lands at the boundaries of the city of Barrie, town of Springwater, and city of Barrie and town of Oro-Medonte. Whereas the findings of the joint need analyst to study stage 1 and 2 completed by Hemson Consulting deemed that there is a need for an additional 930 hectares, which is translated into 2,298 acres of land for comprehensive community employment areas used residential development in the city of Barrie, which could be addressed through a boundary adjustment. Whereas the study finding of the vacant lands within the city of Barrie were identified that natural heritage areas exist within the vacant lands, with several of the parcels of land being vacant within Barrie's existing boundaries as a result of them being undevelopable was not addressed as part of the study. And whereas upon review of the 2009 Barrie-Innisfil Annexation Bill 196 adjustment, the city of Barrie's boundaries to include 2,293 hectares of land, with 61% of this being deemed developable and the remaining being natural heritage environmentally protected. And whereas upon review of the previous data and in consideration of lands within the city of Barrie, it would be reasonable to consider the approximate 60% of the lands within the new expansion area would be developable. And whereas the city of Barrie owns most vacant parcels of land surrounding Little Lake, and whereas the city of Barrie will be working with the province of Ontario to establish a protection plan for the lands surrounding Little Lake. And whereas for the city to achieve the 2,300 acres of developable land as identified within the Hemson study, the city of Barrie would require approximately 4,000 acres of gross land, a much larger number and proposed in the city of Barrie to the township of Springwater and Oro-Medonte. Whereas it is understood by all parties that there will be no service provided to subject neighbor municipalities without a boundary adjustment, and therefore be resolved that given the information contained within the joint needs analyst and study stage 1 and 2 completed by Hemson Consultant, that the city of Barrie with development lands within the city boundary and historically experienced within the 2009 annexation, the intended land request proposed to the town of Springwater and Oro-Medonte be reassessed to better respect the identified the city, demonstrate the need for vacant land required for comprehensive community employment lands and residential housing in order to meet provincial targets, and that an update request to include Little Lake lands in addition to 4,000 acres of gross land be forwarded to the province of Ontario, the provincial land facilitator, with a request for this matter to be dealt with in an expedient manner. That the mayor and CEO can continue with meeting identified by the province land facilitator to negotiate, and an update to the city of Barrie's border with neighboring municipalities, and staff report back on January 8, 2025 with the scope of work to proceed with stage 3 to identify Barrie's boundary with neighboring municipalities.
Okay. Members of council, I have to read this. Okay, I do. I just got the nod saying I have to read it. Just going to do as I'm told. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Harvey. The title is Joint Land Needs Assessment. Whereas the city of Barrie is forecast to experience significant population and employment growth to 2051. Whereas to address this growth, Hemson Consulting was jointly retained to evaluate the need for additional employment and residential lands at the boundaries of the city of Barrie and the town of Springwater and the city of Barrie and the township of Oro-Medonte. And whereas the findings of the joint needs analysis and study stage 1 and 2 completed by Hemson Consulting determined that there is a need for an additional 930 hectares, 2,298 acres, of land for comprehensive community employment area uses and residential development in the City of Barrie, which could be addressed through a boundary adjustment. And whereas the study findings of the vacant lands within the City of Barrie were identified, the natural heritage areas that exist within these vacant lands, with several of the parcels of land being vacant within Barrie's existing boundary as a result of them being undevelopable, say that 3 times fast, was not addressed as part of the study. And whereas upon review of the 2009 Barrie Municipal Annexation, Bill 196 adjusted the City of Barrie's boundary to include 2,293 hectares of land, with 61% of it being deemed developable and the remaining being natural heritage environmentally protected. And whereas upon review of the previous data and consideration of lands within the City of Barrie, it would be reasonable to consider that approximately 60% of lands within the new expanded area would be developable. And whereas the City of Barrie owns most vacant parcels of land around surrounding Little Lake, and whereas the City of Barrie will be working with the Province of Ontario to establish a protection plan for the lands surrounding Little Lake, and whereas for the City to achieve the 2,300 acres of developable land as identified within the Hemson study, the City of Barrie will require approximately 4,000 acres of gross land, a much larger number than initially proposed by the City of Barrie to the townships of Springwater and Oro-Medonte. And whereas it is understood by all parties that there will be no servicing provided to the subject neighboring municipalities without a boundary adjustment, therefore be it resolved that given the information contained within the joint needs analysis and study stage 1 and 2 completed by Hemson Consulting, the City of Barrie's experience with developable lands within the city's boundary and historical experience with the 2009 annexation, the initial land requests and proposals to the townships of Springwater and Oro-Medonte be reassessed to better respect and identify the city's demonstrated need for vacant land required for comprehensive community employment lands and residential housing in order to meet provincial targets, and that an updated request to include the Little Lake area lands in addition to the 4,000 acres of gross land be forwarded to the Province of Ontario and the Provincial Land Facilitator with a request for this matter to be dealt with in an expeditious manner, and that the Mayor and CAO continue with the meeting identified by the Provincial Land Facilitator to negotiate an update to the City of Barrie's border with neighboring municipalities and staff report back on January 8th, 2025 with the scope of work to proceed with Stage 3 to identify Barrie's border with neighboring municipalities. Before I go to Councillor Hamilton, who has an amendment based on the questions that were asked earlier, I just want to get some clarity. Ms. Banfield, was there a guesstimate that we had with regards to the change in the definition for industrial land?
Yes, Mayor Nuttall, the calculation is about 20%. So of our total employment land, about 20% of it is the non-industrial designation. And so that's, at first blush, that's kind of what we're looking at, a reduction of about 20% of our total employment land in the official plan as it is today.
Sorry, members of council, I'm trying to use my phone to calculate what that is, so I apologize. So that would change it from 793 hectares down to 634.5 hectares of employment land currently in the City of Barrie. So even assuming that I'm completely wrong about the mapping earlier, and I might be, we're still at 20% below what had been suggested. So we're going to move on to the actual amendment. And I want to be, just before sorry, Councillor Hemson, I want to be fair to Hemson. Like, the planning world is changing daily in Ontario right now. It's not fair. It's not really fair that change, it was in the scope of that report, or not in the scope of the report when it was just 30 some odd days old. So to be fair to Hemson and Steph and his team, but it doesn't change the fact that it was done. Councillor.
Thank you for that. Completely agree, and not undermining any of the work that was completed. But I do have an amendment to put on the floor. It is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Morales that the direct motion concerning the joint lands needs assessment be amended as follows: that as part of the report back, staff verify the developable industrial land needs identified by Hemson. And I don't think I need to speak to that based on the discussion that took place.
Sorry, Councillor. I just wanted to make sure I knew how this was going to work into it, and it's perfect. It'll just be added to the end after a comma. Would you like to speak to this, or?
No, I don't think so, based on the conversation. Unless people have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any other member of council like to ask questions or speak to the motion? I'm seeing none. So all those in favor of the motion amendment, sorry, that's approved. And on the main motion as amended, are there any comments or questions? I've got Councillor Morales, I've got Councillor Harvey, I've got Councillor Rietma.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. There was a very telling duality in the presentation tonight. Intensification is not desired, Mayor Nuttall. Yet, if we don't annex lands, intensification is the only way forward. Real, painful, makes you heavy, makes you angry about living in your neighborhood, intensification. So the interesting duality of that is the data is clear. Hemson Group was clear about that. And so, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the zoning public meeting. And some people don't want an intensification. Some people think they don't want it. Some is fine, just not everywhere. Some people were very micro about a specific area, which, by the way, to those people have actually come a long ways on a specific area. Reach out to me if you want to chat further. But this report is clear. There's two paths forward, and without annexation, it will be there's no other pathway forward, and it will be painful. So I think it's just important food for thought. There was a lot of material that was consumed tonight, and I think it's extremely important to just say that because, you know, I don't want any members of the community to advocate against their own interests, what they value. And sometimes we have to make choices. We make choices as councillors, tough, painful choices. And sometimes members of the public can also have to make tough, painful choices on what they advocate for and what they prioritize. And again, nothing ever happens the way we want. And that's not to say that if we go through annexation, intensification isn't required. I think, you know, obviously it's this imperfect middle that is where the outcome goes. And as Ms. Banfield will probably remind us, one thing is what we want the market to do, and then another thing is what they end up doing, because we can't force them to do it. We don't live in a country where we can just mandate and build subdivisions and go forward. So that is an extremely important duality, Mayor Nuttall, that I think needs to be reminded, because the contrast could not be more clear.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got next on the speakers list is Councillor Harvey. Then I have Councillor Rietma.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Obviously, it's a very concise report, 50 some odd pages, and obviously this was one of our longer slide presentations that we've had at Council too, at I think 28 slides by the time he was done. But I think you really only have to go to slide 25 where it tells everything. And here is a outside Toronto-based company that, I'll be quite honest with you, my 6 years on council, I've never even heard of. So it's very evident they have no skin in the game here with the city of Barrie. And obviously, initially, the first slide, when I first started looking at this presentation before it, as soon as it went public, I wasn't expecting the end outcome to be actually what it was, because the first slide kind of made me sway that, okay, maybe we don't need this. But it just goes to show you that they've done a very concise review of everything and shown both sides. And obviously, they're indicating right now that the initial reason that this was even started, they feel is a bit of a weak position. However, I don't believe that the 20% that Ms. Banfield just spoke about was taken into account with that. So that may change things moving forward with further review. But it's very clear that if we're going to hit our targets and have community areas that are complete and comprehensive, we can't do it within the lands that we have. And when you look at how slow it took for the lands to start getting developed from the previous annexation, I would hope that, however this all plays out, that that's not the case moving forward. Obviously, I think these lands are going to be far easier to service than the lands, especially on the Salem side where I am, trying to get pipes under the 400 highway and such forth. But it just shows that the need is there, and that's why when I was approached about seconding this motion, I didn't think twice about it, because slide 25 clearly indicates what their overall outcome was from their very thorough report. And I do appreciate the way that he answered questions too, very open, concise, and you could tell he's got no skin in the game, and here to represent all parties and just provide his professional opinion on what his thoughts are from a planning review. And it was interesting to hear how things have changed, because I had no idea that there was a much movement in the needle in the last, especially 30 days. But that's why we always lean on our expert there, Ms. Banfield, when it comes to planning. But I do look forward to see what phase 3 looks like and move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Ritma.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just have one question, really, and that is the work that was done now was, up to this point, was only to do with Oro-Medonte and Springwater. Is the intention of phase 3 to look all the way around the city at what is the best place for us to expand? Because I do think that, you know, the case has been made that we really need to look at additional lands for the city. I guess my question is, you know, where are we going to be looking?
Yeah, I'm going to try to answer this, and CAO Prowse, feel free to rein me in at any point on this. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. So the actual facilitation itself is only related to Barrie, Springwater, and Oro-Medonte. And by verdict of Springwater and Oro-Medonte being inside of the County of Simcoe, the County of Simcoe is at the table as well. So there's been no indication from the province of Ontario to research other municipalities other than Oro-Medonte and Springwater. It's been specifically constrained to those two areas. And in order for us to look anywhere else, we would require the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to direct the provincial land facilitator to look at or consider other directions other than the directions of northeast and northwest and north. Is that right, Michael?
Mayor Nuttall, that is exactly correct.
Okay, that was the answer to my question. Thanks.
He didn't even need to get the reins out. That was good. When I was a kid, my mom had reins on me. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but yes, yeah, I couldn't run away. Okay, are there any other questions or comments from members of council? I'm seeing none. So all those in favor of the main motion? Gentlemen. And it carries. All right, the direct motion is now adopted and complete by council.
That was the update from Barrie City Hall. Thank you for watching.